cái tiếng mấy cái cho pin thì lên thêm bị ông pin cả giờ cái caro cái mọi chuyện cái cho yếu cái chân nó cũng mấy cho pin cũng mà cho chín bên quét thì giờ mình kín phát cũng niên đây cũng bày kín anh kia bắt đàn chỉ nó cái chín tăng nghĩ gì tục cuồng chín nhai world bắt uang chỉ đến nô nên chỉ qua từ trên chỉ qua từ chín ngạc trên nằm ya ai chỉ nhai.
Sudan. Since 1952, this enormous African country has been struck by a civil war between the north and the south. One of the horrible consequences of this war is the revival of slavery.
Mình có ai chỉ là biểu cả là yêu gì cái cả đọc cơ quê này lúc yêu bài của là như thế thì cả rồi chỉ là uy phải chỉ tiền uy cái cả cái bên này yêu quyết tục rồi nên ai chỉ giá lôi cả nó khâu phát cái quên giờ lên tiền cái là khâu cái quên này chỉ tiếng của ra giờ lo là đất pin cái chính thế bên yêu gối đầm đâm cái đó đầm có cái đầm chạc tiền có cái bàn phải do cái nóc bây giờ là cái lốp vợt leo quên cô qua leo quên cái gì cô lên là muốn lôi đống như vậy qua lên này anh trả lại đâu lôi cả làm là liu thì mày giúp nhà phải là đi về cứ đèn chặt đi cứ đèn chỉ cần quạt cái lốp vợt rồi lắm na chuyên viên thì nhà anh giờ là bao là vô về với vô quay cái trứng đi vô bàn vợt là yên cái là cái mình vô quay có gà lên không muốn gì quay cái chữ mà đấy nữa là cũng bạc thôi.
So there were, what, 414 slaves, so it's 20,700,000 Sudanese pounds that we owe you. Or put it in his, okay, that's 5 million, that's 5. That's 6 million.
6 million.
13 million.
13 million.
We are here and you have come back because there are many people around the world who've heard about the suffering of the slaves in Sudan. I can only name a few, but I think of Bishop Caesar Matsalari and Bishop Makram Ghazis. And so many people have not only felt bad in their hearts about the suffering, but they have felt that they must do something, and they've prayed every day, and they have given money. So now you're free to go back to your villages, to find your mothers and fathers and your husbands and your relatives and neighbors, and we wish God's blessing upon you and hope that you can live in peace and security from this day onward.
The American John Eibner, who represents CSI, the Swiss organization Christian Solidarity International, travels about 6 times a year to South Sudan. During his visits, he buys back the freedom of women and children that have been enslaved.
This is the wife of his brother, and this is his daughter.
Ah, his daughter. And were they taken at the same time?
One day, the same day they were taken.
The same day. When were they taken?
And then, last year.
And Wadawa?
No, last year. It's not a year. What?
And Wato. And so, have you seen them since they have been back, or is right now the first time you've seen them?
Right now.
That was the first time. Very good. Well, we're very happy. No one knows exactly how many slaves there are in Sudan, but we have reasonably good estimates of the numbers, and we reckon that there are over 100,000 chattel slaves in Sudan. That is, slaves that are the private properties of private masters. And there are many more people who are subjected to slave-like conditions who have not been kept by private masters but end up in government-run concentration camps, which the government calls peace camps. Okay, Noor. Okay, shukran.
Slave trading is a thriving business. Northern militias are raiding villages in the south for slaves, which they then take back to the north. They keep them in their households or sell them to other masters. A few Arabs in the north, so-called retrievers, are tracing the slaves and buying them. They then bring them back to the south, where these retrievers present the slaves to John Eibner, who is buying their freedom.
Well, CSI was invited to come to Sudan back in 1992 by the New Sudan Council of Churches on a fact-finding visit. And we didn't know an awful lot about Sudan. We had heard about, that there's been famine and human rights violations, but we felt we must accept this invitation coming from the churches. And we came, and we were confronted with an appalling situation, a great humanitarian tragedy, an appalling human rights situation, and felt that we shouldn't just abandon Sudan after the visit and move on to other things, but that we should come back. And we've done that many, many times now. The work involves documentation of human rights violations, and we also deliver humanitarian aid, food, medicines, and we became involved in supporting the local community here to retrieve and to redeem those who have been enslaved. All of the money that is used for CSI's part of this program comes from private donors in Europe and in North America. The government troops attacked another village, Angela mentioned, apart from the two north of Warawar, and we'll be staying here now until 12 o'clock, until the security situation in the area in which we're going is ascertained. Because according to the information that they've received here, some of the PDF troops have moved in the direction in which we're going.
One of the biggest independent organizations that supply all kind of aid to the south is the Norwegian People's Aid. Like John Eibner, they operate in the middle of the war zone. Their director, Dan Eef, has dedicated his life to South Sudan and its problems.
The slavery issue is a big crisis in that part of northern Bahr el Ghazal, but it is only part of the whole pattern of the war in Sudan. The war in Sudan is economic, it's political, it is religious as well, it is social, it's historical, it's all of that, but particularly political and economic. And slavery has been used there to depopulate the area and to reduce the strength of the resistance, the southern resistance movement, by hitting at their core area in Bahr el Ghazal. This is the worst war since the Second World War. 2 million people have died, 4 million displaced people, and 500,000 refugees. It's a war of genocide of Islamic fundamentalist government on the African Christian South. It is a war which is out to depopulate southern Sudanese, a population of 7 million people. It's the most primitive and bloody war in Africa. The Northerners see themselves as Arabs and Muslims, and they only form less than 30% of the population. They want all of the African Christian South to be part of their identity, But I even wonder if they did assume their identity, would they still stop the war? Because the resources are in the south. It's full of rivers, fish, it's agriculturally fertile, and then of course there's vast resources of oil. It has gold all over the south, so it's economically huge potential and a very small population.
The Sudanese People's Liberation Army, SPLA, controls the south of Sudan. They try to protect their territory against attacks and raids from the militias and troops from the north. The SPLA has a close relationship with John Eibner. It seems they would do anything he asks.
And the situation in the West County is normal now. Our forces are remain in their locations.
Very good. So you think we can continue with our program up in that area before we leave?
Okay, I will just give me a chance for tomorrow. I will give you a green light to go there.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Commander.
Okay.
Thank
Okay, thank you. I really don't know, but one could call the embassy, the Swiss consulate in Cairo, as Johan has the book, and he would be able to do that. Okay. That's very, very difficult to say in a word why I am doing this, but I came in 1995, shortly after a slave raid, spoke to victims, people who had lost their loved ones. We spoke to people who had been captured in that raid and previous raid and had escaped or been redeemed by their loved ones. And I felt that I had to do something about it. I just couldn't turn my back on this problem, these crimes against humanity. And knowing what I knew, I wouldn't have been able to live with myself had I just decided, well, I'm going to forget about these people and turn my attention to something else, or have a more leisurely sort of life. But is there a list of names, or?
No, people are working.
They're working on it now. The people from these 11 villages, are they still near their villages, or have they all run away?
No, they're there.
So they're there, we can see them.
So they're trying to build some Tuko.
Trying to rebuild.
In Nairobi, Kenya, Father Kizito is running a project for street children. Besides this, he is responsible for several aid projects in Sudan. He watches the activities of John Eibner and CSI closely.
They do this from so far only with occasional trips. They say they have a network of local people with local chief, and so it makes sense. But these are things also that can easily go out of hand. I admire the trust they have in these local people, but due to the other questions that are coming up of this number and so on, one is, I am basically doubtful.
I have known many relief workers in the South who are not willing to talk about it publicly or talk to the press about it, but who have been aware of and witnessed transactions in which the local authorities were palming off as slaves children who had never in fact been enslaved, so that they also got a cut of the money.
I'm very sorry to understand that there are other people trying to talk badly of the slavery that is being taken place here, because this is the real fact. Children are being enslaved by the government, and it is the policy of Islamic government to see that small children are taken to the Islamic school in northern Sudan or abroad in Arab countries. This is the real fact, and it is there. And if those who used to criticize that the buying back of children by CSI is a crime, let them come with the alternative, that the children which have been enslaved, thousands of children that have been enslaved by the government in Khartoum, let them come, let them bring them today. And then I think we will stop this, because the children being brought by the CSI are the relief to the population that I have now, that are under my control now.
John Eibner is finally allowed to visit the raided area to make a report on human rights violations. Meanwhile, a new group of 400 slaves is already waiting for more than a month for Eibner to come and buy their freedom. The group consists of only women and children. Their husbands and fathers have been killed during the slave raids. Men are considered too dangerous to be held as slaves.
Bako dam koi tantiok, bako yoke yan galu. Bako dam mo. Kaja bek bako na ka wachi ari tawan. Kuchi waka wan bako dar wachin. Kumeji waka kaya na unchi ka bere tu. Kamu ka kaya. Okay. Galwa ka kaya. Waku ruki na yaka chi nunto gala nuer ka chi na ran ko nuer chi na ran. Jawo kwa de la ni chi ka wan jaka mai bela la ka kaya. Acha ka ka wan na kaya.
Knowing what happens to slaves, knowing the severe psychological and physical torture, knowing about the rape, the beatings, executions, forcible conversions, I would have no qualms about paying a raider if it meant that that person were free. What should one do? Leave somebody in bondage to perhaps be murdered, to be raped, to have for a woman to have her genitals mutilated ritually, and to say, no, I'm not going to give somebody the equivalent of $35. That would be terribly immoral.
I find that very muddled reasoning, to say the least, that you're under a moral obligation to pay people not to commit crimes. It's the moral obligation of the state and the society and the public opinion at large to stamp out slavery. That's the moral obligation. And you don't stamp out slavery by paying people who've been proven to be slave raiders.
Kaya bega ci bana na ko de ko yon ya dor ci ko ya won ci ran ba ca de ci ca ko ci bang ko ci de ben la yon ka mo ku ñeng be ko ci ran won ci ci de na ci
The horse. Ask the horse. Angelo, could you ask the chief how the horse came here? How did this horse get here?
The horse came here to attack the villages, and when they clashed with SPLA soldiers, so the owner was killed.
The owner was killed. Yeah. Would there be any identification of the owner? Everything they have.
What are you taking this?
What did they have in here?
The key then. As the key then.
The food ammunition, yeah?
Ammunition?
Ammunition. Okay. No identification.
Well, let's take these off. There may be some.
If you open this, then you may get his name.
I think that.
Name of God.
Quran, is that?
Quran.
Let's open this up. Let's see what's
Open
inside.
one. Yes, see, I'm afraid I know what is inside.
You know? Let's see.
Exactly, I see it. The Burhalin are young Arab Muslim tribes, individuals, citizens, are very young. They are all 18. And in this area, you are not considered a man unless you own a horse. So the government of Sudan knows this. And the first thing to provide is the horse. He will be offered a gun, usually a Kalashnikov or a Tulishi, then 50,000 Sudanese pounds, and 2 sacks of wheat or dura, whatever. This is to live for his family. Plus that, he's going to benefit from selling the slaves and selling the cattle which he's going to get. And this is because it is his own property. That's why they compete on taking as much as they can. This is what offered. This is offered to them as an incentive. And they're playing a very major role for the government of the Sudan. They're fighting its jihad war. And they're convinced they will be brainwashed for a long time that this is the jihad war, you're going to fight the infidels, you're going to spread Islam, etc. So these values make sense for those very illiterate people.
Okay.
Okay. This is how it is done.
Why the project?
Nonsense.
No, something will be written in that. And there will be drawings.
Magician symbols.
Exactly.
Yeah. There you are.
Wait a minute. It's bent here.
Yeah, take care. Don't tear the paper.
It won't be charged.
Now we are all interested in this.
That is it.
Okay.
I'm interested in a photocopy of that.
No.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ذلكم حكم الله يحكم بينكم. This is very important because it says ذلكم حكم الله يحكم بينكم والله عليم حكيم. This version, it is stating that God is the one who makes the decision. He makes the decision actually, isn't it? Rules among you and make the decision. And that is because of his wisdom and knowledge. Is that true?
Back in.
Okay.
Yeah. It's relatively
Very
same.
good.
It
Let's
is
keep
related
this
to
one,
war.
John. And
It is related to war.
that's right. It's war,
Yes,
yes.
it's related to war.
Okay.
Declaration.
This is the jihad text.
Yeah, declaration.
Yes. This
Okay.
is a jihad text. We
I
put
don't
it
know.
here.
We'll put it
No,
back
no,
in.
John, keep it out. You don't have to put
Yeah,
it in
I'll
there.
dig out because that was really destroyed.
Yeah.
Ken bala gina ada ro ka chala bangi jakin ar tin ko chi to wa ke da bangi ko an ko to wa da bangi ko kon ke ka dang lo ke ko ja ko ba ka lai ada ro ki nyai ba lai ko di
Na coi cho qua lửa cái ngay.
ko chi kwa da lo ti chitan bot ka ro ko ti ro ko chi no ka tiao bet
أنا طبعا رأي بالزراعة عندي إبل وعندي بقر وعندي غنم دي كلها بمتلكها فالحتة دي هي موجودة عند العرب يعملوها الناس خاصة الرحى وبعدين ما كلها يعني في جزء منهم الناس الشباب اللي زينا نحن كده هو بيعملوا العمل ده بيجوا من هناك بحصينهم وبيجوا بسلاحهم بيجي بيشيلوا بأقبار الناس يودوها هناك بعدين في ناس ما كلها الشعبي ما كله حتى إن في أي دول إنه بتلقى الإنسان السلبي وفي الناس اللي بيعملوا أعمالهم بطال في عناصر كويسة فنحن ده كله عشان نحن نحاول نمرق الأطفال دي من المأزق اللي فيهم لأن الأولاد اللي بيشيلوا من هناك دي هو ده يعني أن الأولاد بيشيلوا من هناك بيشيلوا من المراحل من هنا ودي السبب خلانا نجيبهم هنا عشان لأهلهم هنا لا ده عملية إنسانية
CSI started freeing 12 slaves, 25, 30 slaves per trip. Now there are 5,000 to go. So are they encouraging slavery? I don't know. Are they encouraging adoption more than slavery? I don't know, it's possible. Are they maybe encouraging people to cheat them? Because they say it is so easy to get some money. And the money they take is not so big, because I guess they pay something in the range of $50 per slave. So it's not a big amount of money as such, even if the numbers are big. But for the local people, for sure, that is a big amount. So the temptation for many to try to cheat and to sneak in and pretending to be a slave to get some money is very great, I guess.
A colleague has told me that she's done interviews this year with families in Bahr el-Ghazal, and the families told her that they rented their children, basically, to pose as slaves. They got a small amount of money. The children were gone not very long, and they came back, and they were happy with the arrangement. In 1999, there were children among the group of slaves, or so-called slaves, who were living in the village, who were registered in their feeding center and had on the feeding center bracelet. And not only that, waved at the feeding center staff because they knew them during the buyback. So clearly, there is a certain amount of padding going on, and we have no way of knowing because, of course, nobody wants us to know how much padding is going on.
There is absolutely no evidence that this is fueling the slave trade. If that were the case, of course, we would not do it. And those who make this claim have never yet provided evidence. We eagerly await them to provide evidence. The evidence that we have points to the contrary.
If you are an entrepreneur, you will see an opportunity that if a Western, and Western means rich, organization is willing to pay $50 for each person, you greatly maximize your profits if you produce 100 people instead of 1, or 1,000 people instead of 100.
لأن أول حاجة في البداية الأولى تشيله وتستفيد منه، بيخدمك بدون قرش وتعريفة، يعني ولا عنده بدون أجار، يعني بيشتغل بيرعى عليك غنمك الصغار وبيرعى عليك البقر وبيحرث لك في الزراعة. فجأة أنت مجرد ما تشعر إن الود ذاته بيجيب قروش برضه ثاني تبيعه. لا بيقوا طبعا في كل حرب بيشيلوا، وكل حرب بيشيلوا لحد ما وصلت كميات كثيرة دي. يعني في كل سنة نازل سنويا بيجوا هنا. هسه قبل فترة جوا هنا. قريب ده.
The practice of the mass buying back seems to be counterproductive by now, because the worry that it will actually cause people to go out and abduct new victims. It's what they talk about as the invisible victim. You free one person, and then the person who's taken him hostage or slave has an incentive to go out and do it again. They're being rewarded for bad practices.
If what we were doing meant that more women and children were being enslaved, more villages being burnt down, more cows and goats stolen, more grain stores destroyed, the community leaders, the chiefs, the civil authorities, the religious leaders would say, let's not do this anymore. But that isn't the case. They want us to continue because they themselves know far better than people in ivory towers in the West that this is not a free market in slaves, that the important factors are military and political factors in determining how many people come into bondage, and that this is not, in fact, fueling a slave trade. It's easier then to control, I think, if we if they're in front of us. Wherever there is money, there's a risk of corruption. So responsible people do everything that they can to minimize those risks. What we do is we fingerprint, especially now that the numbers are getting larger. We've started a system trying to fingerprint as many slaves as we can, build up a database of fingerprints which can be scanned and eventually compared. We also take photographs.
It's quite interesting that some of the people who are redeeming slaves now have started to photograph them and fingerprint them. I don't think that proves very much, because several thousand or 10,000 people have been bought back before this was started. So you have no idea if the people that are being fingerprinted and photographed as first-time slaves in 1999 or 2000 haven't been bought back 2 or 3 times prior to that process.
We're very happy to see you today. We've waited a long time to see you. And how did you all get here? Did you all come together?
They were brought by Barim and Abaka.
They were brought back here. Yeah. Is there anybody here who was not brought by them?
انت شغلك كان شنو لما اخذت؟
شغلنا
شغلك انت في بيت تغسل شنو؟
تغسل هدوم، تغسل العفش في البيت، ونقش في الضايع ونمشي السوق.
طيب ليه ما جريتي؟ ما شريتي من ستيب ليه؟
ستيب؟
لما قاعده مع سليمان ده وانت بتمشي السوق ما تجري تمشي اهلك.
تجري من العرب كله؟
كله عرب.
اي ما في الدنقه، كان دنقه في مالي، كان عرب نجري من وين؟
طيب شغل سليمان ده ما برضه بيجي بنوم بالليل معاكي؟ انت بتنوم وين؟
بنوم في البيت صغير كده بس.
شغل سليمان ده عنده ناس غيرك ولا انت بس معه؟
عنده عوين تاني.
من اولاد دنقه؟ كم؟
4.
منو جابك هنا؟
جابوا
جابك من هنا؟ ابراهيم ده لقاك كيف؟ دفع قروش لسليمان؟
ابراهيم جار دفع قروش وتقول انا شيلت في البيت.
ابراهيم لما اخذك من الستيب وداك وين؟
ابراهيم
لما
جابوا هنا.
طوالي بس هنا ولا وداك قاعدك في حته؟
طوالي هنا بس.
مشيتي كم يوم؟ انت لك كم يوم من ما جيتي هنا؟
طيب هو كانوا دنين فيها وتم كان بينو.
الناس دي نحن بنجيبهم عندنا ناس هناك بنتعامل معهم، بيجيبوا لنا واحد واحد، والتعامل بتاعنا بالليل، بالنهار ما قاعدين نتعامل بالليل بس. التعامل بتاعنا ده هو بنجيب 1 2 3 و4 و5 سنين، وعندنا ناس هناك برضه زي 30 نفر برضه او زي 25 بيكون بيتعاملوا معاهم، بيتعاملوا معانا ويجيبوا لنا الناس دي، وبعد ما نتجمع من هناك بنتحرك بالليل من هناك من المنطقة. بعد ذاك بنجي سايرين في طريقنا لحد ما نجي في 11 يوم، يعني وصلنا في 11 يوم. والحياة في الشارع طبعا صعبة جدا، ما في موية، والناس ماشيين حافين الأقدام وما عندهم بطاطين ووحدين، حالتهم تعبانة شديد جدا. نحن عشان ما ناس الحكومة هناك، لو واحد مشى مدينة أو مشى يحاول يتعامل يجيب الأولاد دي، طبعا شخصيتك بتكون ظاهرة، فنحن دارين الحتة دي بتكون تساعدنا عشان نقدر نجيب أكبر كمية.
At the time I had a grandfather who was very famous. His name is Ziber Basha. He's well known as a slave trader, but still he was living with the Dinka, very peacefully, very respectful, etc. But I think at that time, I didn't live that time, I don't know, but I think at that time slavery was just considered normal. by everybody, nobody. But now, if you say slavery, everybody will shrink and will low. Right? What is going on? That's why now, if I'm saying that the values of today are against slavery and slave trade, I'm right 100%. Cannot say that. I had my grandfather, slave trader, but that had nothing to do with me. I have to assess my time and my environment and my, that's what.
Tong Maduk Mo.
Tong Maduk, Tong Maduk Mo.
I think it's been very, very good that the different people that have been doing slave redemption have taken the press with them. That's been very educational for the international public to actually see the children and the women who are being bought back, to put a face on slavery. You certainly can't go into the areas where they're held slaves and film them working or anything like that. You wouldn't be able to get out of Khartoum with a camera, much less to the areas where they're held slaves. The question is, do you have to redeem 5,000 people in order for there to be publicity? No, you don't.
The wives and children of these men were enslaved about 3 years ago, and they and a group of other men from their village followed some days after the Popular Defense Force to the north to find out where their wives and children were with a view to helping them escape. And they did indeed find them in the town of Merom, and as they were trying to help their wives escape, they were caught and taken out into the bush and had their arms chopped off with machetes and axes.
Go closer a little bit. Can you just go closer?
It certainly isn't staged for Western cameras. There are people who are enslaved. We've seen ourselves some of the destruction. We've spoken to people who have witnessed the slave raids. We speak to slaves who have returned. This isn't done for the cameras. The cameras help in making this terrible problem known to the outside world. What we're talking about here are crimes against humanity. You know, what's going on here is a very, very serious matter, not only for the Sudanese slaves, but for humanity. When a regime in Khartoum can systematically commit crimes against humanity year after year after year, and Western governments are eager to renew good relations with that regime, it's very important that the media is here to see what's going on and to inform the world. Otherwise, these crimes against humanity will continue, and we will become, in the West, numb to them.
I think he believes in what he's doing. There is no doubt. He must believe in it. And he may also think, you know, maybe he's also, I would have no objection if, you know, he says, okay, maybe I know that maybe the great majority of those people are not real slaves in the strict sense of the word, but even if freeing 5,000, I free 100 or 50 or 10 that were real slaves, it's still worth it to do it. I would accept an answer like that, yes. So I think he's trying to do his best. As it happened in Sudan, nobody really is in control of what is happening there. And the country is too big, it's so vast. Two years ago, there was a great famine in the whole of Sudan, also in the Nuba Mountains. At that stage, some people in the Nuba Mountains, for instance, they went on their own volition to the government-held areas, and they were working for people there in a situation that is not very different from slavery. But it was done in their own will.
So a lot of people are returning to the South because conditions in the North are not good for them as Southerners. They face a lot of discrimination. And they would prefer to be with their own families and their own culture. So it's possible you get those returnees also in a group. But you don't know, because nobody is really staying on top of this, or what where the people came from originally, or what their names are.
There are now 25,000 plus people who are not enslaved, who would either be enslaved now or dead, had this program not gained momentum and been able to develop. There have been over 25,000 slaves who have come back to this area, who've been reunited either with their families, or if their families are no longer alive or here, with their community. And that is not a mean achievement. There is also, in addition to that, the awareness that has been created in Europe, North America, and Africa, that there is slavery in Sudan.
I would like to see this attention be broadened to the whole of Sudan and to the whole problem. Because then otherwise we fall into the very old risk that we elicit some money from people, and they think that with $50 they saved a slave, and then this slave is put in a situation where after 3 months he will die of starvation, or he will be in a situation that is really inhuman, as much as the situation was inhuman when he was a slave.
This group have now been freed to go back. They don't have to stay in this area anymore, and so some of the relatives have come, and some of the spearmen, the holy men, according to the traditional religion, and so they have gone off, and they'll go back to the places where they have been camped out over the past weeks.
The redeemed slaves are now free to go back to their home villages. Most of them have to walk for many days without protection through the war zone till they reach their homes, where they don't know what they can expect to find. A lot of them don't even know if they will have a place to stay. Most of all, they are anxious to find out which, if any, of their family is still alive.
I've come to the conclusion that humanitarian aid in Sudan has become a disaster in itself, a palliative, putting a bandage on. I've been doing relief work for 14 years. I'm tired of it. It's not the solution. So the crisis in Sudan, the humanitarian crisis, is resulting from the politics. It's a political crisis. And you only solve a political crisis with a political solution, while we keep the people alive. A man in Sudan said to me, though it hit me very hard, he said, Dan, it's the same thing whether I die fat or whether I die thin. I'm going to die anyway. So why you fat me up to die? Why not stop the killing?
I have been brought up since I'm a child in a town in the center of Sudan. It's called Kosti. There were Denka, Nuer, Shuluk, the Tuka, the Busa, Nuba, Shaigia, Jalia from the north, all the tribes. This is the environment in which I live. I love it. This is the Sudan. I love this environment in which we were all living peacefully. There are, of course, some quite a distant way, but we loved each other. And I tell you one thing, which is very important. We never felt different. In my town, the graves are the same. The Christian is going to be buried beside the Muslim, and the Muslim is buried beside the Christian. And we go on burying the Christians, and the Christians will share the burial of the Muslim, and they will pray. Each one is praying his own prayer. And I tell you something, this government could not change this. Despite this propaganda that they are very fundamentalist and Islamist, they cannot do that. They cannot prevent the people of the Sudan from continuing this normal life. I have great hope that things will be settled and peace will prevail in Sudan.
Kuma bi chako no, kuma bi kara lolo cuma tong tar bandar Sudan tar, ayo ko tong ada ko arem ke Yesus Kristus. Kwa kol bi do ben, ayo ukit bukai do, so a cukup miat ke kira kol ki Yesus Kristus cero jom. Pin, kwa ya ko gwati, atira an kwat ke ki chokan no ko la. Kwa tira an le bukai da kol kulela ki chok ben no ne are, ali. Ini ko kwada ko mi ko kwate ti nyare ke chin chong bebe laki bar bu ko ren bi chong no ine le bi chong no ga ko le ren ba ba pir ko mi ba yo bar bu ko ren bi mi yo ka ba cham ko ba ko dong bi ran ba lokka te de kan mun wonder way
If there was no war, is a little paradise, really. Is with people that are welcoming, with people that are so kind. I think that Sudan is the country in the world that has the highest number of recorded languages. You know, they say that in Sudan there are 652 different languages. In the whole world there are 2,500, so a quarter of the whole languages of the world are spoken in Sudan. And to each language corresponds a different culture, a different way of dressing, or a different way of going around naked. So, you know, all this is part of the fascination. Also part of it is for sure the fact that the Sudanese, in spite of all these difficulties, in spite of these problems, they are open to the outside world. Their response to whatever little you do is so overwhelming, and then they take your heart, and then you have to go back in spite of the danger, in spite of the problems.
The Human Rights Watch position on buying back of slaves is not as harsh as condemnation, but because we recognize that some families have been assisted by it, but the method that's being used now is not satisfactory at all, and we're afraid that it gives rise to further abuses and encourages bad practices and human rights abuses, encourages the raiding. Buying slaves back will not end the practice.
Most of the NGOs who are critics never come up here. Why do you assume that NGOs should know everything? A lot of them are very, very ignorant. People in the community are quite shocked with this kind of ill-informed criticism that is actually very damaging to the victimized community, to the slaves themselves. Wherever we go, you know, the chiefs, the religious leaders, mothers and fathers come up to us and thank us for the work that we're doing, and encourage us to continue.
Can you hang on to that for me?
Definitely.
Let me just clean me up.
This is the victimized community. It is this community that is victimized by the slave raids. We're here to serve them. We've accepted their invitation to come and help them solve the problem, and we'll continue working together with them as long as they wish us to.